The shouting was everywhere. Loud, blaming, angry. "You gave him tools, my son." What kind of grown man lets a child play with dangerous equipment? Elias stood still, frozen in the harsh glow of the street lamp, right outside his small garage. The cool metal of the door pressed into his back, but he didn't move. His hands, stained with years of grease and work, were slightly raised open palms, as if to say he meant no harm. "I told you." Another voice shouted, deep and full. Of rage. No license, no insurance. "He acts like this is some kind of playground." Elias didn't reply. The only sound he could really hear was the distant scream of an ambulance siren, getting closer, and the soft, rattling breath in his own chest. Just up the street, red and blue lights painted the sidewalk like some kind of cruel celebration. And on the pavement, the bike, bent, broken. Its front wheel folded like a snapped bone. And next to it, a boy just 10 years old being lifted carefully onto a stretcher. Elias didn't look away. His eyes followed the boy's small, pale face as he disappeared into the ambulance. People kept yelling. More parents had arrived, drawn by the sirens and the rumors. They saw the bike, the garage, the hurt child, and they connected dots without waiting for facts. They pointed at Elias like he was already guilty. Like they'd seen enough, but Elias stayed silent. Because what could he even say? No one would believe him if he told them he hadn't taught the boy anything. That he had told the kids not to mess around in the empty lot next to his shop. That he had never once let them touch a bike unless they asked and he was there. He knew what it looked like. And sometimes that was all that mattered. The boy's name was Leo. Elias had seen him before. Curious, always hanging around when Maya was there. Now there was a kid who wanted to learn, who asked questions, who listened. She showed up, rain or shine, hoodie too big for her frame, a notebook tucked into her backpack. Elias didn't know much about kids, but she had something. She paid attention. Leo and his friends were different. They just wanted to show off. Be fast, be first. And Elias had told them more than once to stop, but today they hadn't come to him. Today, they went into the empty lot with a busted old bike and tried to fix it themselves. Leo had tightened the wrong bolt on the front. Brake, then he rode off down the street, fast, too fast. He never stood a chance when he hit that pothole. The crash had been sharp and sudden. Elias had heard it from inside the garage metal hitting pavement, a scream, and then silenced out. Now here they were. The police. The neighbors. The mothers with trembling hands and shaking voices. One looking at him like he was a monster. He didn't run. Didn't explain. Just stood there. Still behind the shouting, behind the flashing lights. He kept staring at the twisted bicycle. The frame could be repaired. The chain could be replaced. But what about everything else? The trust. The small bit of hope he had. Finally started to feel again. Gone. Just like that. His garage's one quiet place in the world was no longer a place of peace. It was a crime scene. A battleground. He felt the weight of it pressing down on him. The same weight that had been with him for 5 years. Since the accident, since his wife, since the baby that never got to be born. And now, somehow, he'd messed up again. Hurt someone again. He hadn't even touched the boy, hadn't spoken to him that day, but still, it didn't matter. The world had already made up its mind. Sirens faded. The crowd began to break apart, though some people stayed whispering. And watching, someone snapped a photo. Someone else muttered something about calling the news. Elias turned slowly and walked inside his garage. He didn't turn on the light. Just stood in the dark, listening to the silence press in from all sides. He sat down on the old wooden stool, elbows on his knees, and dropped his head into his hands. Outside, the wind blew a scrap of newspaper across the sidewalk. The red spray, paint across the garage door was still wet. One word, reckless. He hadn't even known they'd done it. But somehow, the word felt true. Not because he believed it, but because it felt like something he'd been trying to outrun for years. 6. Weeks earlier, the sky was already fading into that deep, heavy gray that made everything feel slower, sadder. Rain slid off rooftops in steady streams. The pavement glistened, puddles stretching across the cracked road like forgotten mirrors. Elias rolled down the garage door and tugged the lock into place. Another quiet day. Just like most days. The tools were silent, the bikes untouched. His hands were stiff from the cold and from years of use. They'd once fixed engines, built fences, held dreams. Now they mostly stayed busy just to stop the ache inside from getting too loud. He turned to head home, his boots splashing lightly with each step. Then, out of nowhere, a voice. "Excuse me, sir?" Soft, shaky, almost too small to hear over. The sound of a rain dot, he turned slowly. There she was, a little girl soaked through. Maybe 8 years old. Blonde hair stuck to her cheeks, her hoodie clinging to her like a second skin. One backpack strap had snapped, leaving it dragging behind her on the wet asphalt like a broken wing. She held a bike upright beside her, though. Just barely. The front wheel was bent so badly it looked like a pretzel. "My bike," she said, her voice trembling. "It's broken." Elias stared for a moment. This was the kind of thing people warned you about. A strange child alone. At night, asking for help. He didn't know her, didn't know where she came from. His instinct told him to be careful. "You lost?" He asked, voice gruff from disuse. She nodded. "Took a wrong turn. Then this happened." She held up her hands. They were smudged with grease and dirt. Her fingers were trembling from the cold. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked up at the darkening sky, then back at her. It was late. He was tired. And this was not his problem, but just as he opened his mouth to send her off, a truck barreled through the intersection behind her. Its horn screamed into the quiet street. Headlights cut through the gloom like a blade. She flinched, stepped backward. Right into the street, Elias moved without thinking. One hand grabbed her by the arm. The other yanked the broken bike out of the way. The truck missed her by inches, spraying water as it roared past. The girl stumbled back onto the sidewalk, breath shallow and quick. She looked up at him, eyes wide, terrified. I didn't see it." Elias's heart was pounding. He hadn't moved that fast in years. "Yeah, well," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Try looking next time." She nodded quickly, like she was afraid he might yell. He sighed again. "All right," he said, softer now. "Bring it inside. Let's see what's what." The garage door rattled back up, and he motioned for her to push the bike inside. The smell of motor oil, rubber, and old metal filled the air, a comforting mix to him. Though most people would probably call it unpleasant, he flipped on the single bulb overhead. It flickered once, then lit up the room in a pale glow. The girl stood quietly, eyes wide, dripping onto the floor. Elias knelt beside the bike, running his fingers over the rim, the chain, the brakes. The wheel was shot. The brakes were loose. The seat was tilted wrong, too. This wasn't just a busted tire. This thing had been ridden hard and not taken care of at all. "You ride this a lot?" he asked, not looking up. "Every day after school," she said. "My mom works late." Elias paused. That explained a lot. He glanced up and saw her shivering. "Sit," he said, pointing to a stack of old crates. "Take off that bag. You're soaked." She obeyed silently, curling into a small ball. The straps of her backpack looked ready to tear apart. He looked at her for a moment longer, then got back to work. For 20 quiet minutes, only the sound of tools tapping, chains moving, and rain outside filled the space. Elias didn't talk much, never had. But fixing things, that was his language. He could lose himself in repairs. Worn parts made more sense than people. Machines didn't lie. They broke, but they always told you why if you listened. He made the bike functional again. Not pretty, but safe. "There," he finally said, straightening up with a low groan. "It'll hold?" She stood up and came closer. You ever try fixing it yourself? He asked Dot. She shook her head. Elias hesitated. Then, against every instinct, he knelt down again. Come here. She stepped forward. See this? He pointed to the chain. It's loose. Easy fix once you know how. He took her small fingers cold and clean and gently guided them over the metal. Showed her how to tighten the derailleur, how to line up the brakes. Machines aren't magic. He said, they're honest. You listen, they listen back. She looked up at him. For the first time that night, she smiled. My name's Maya. He nodded once. Elias. Across the street, inside a sleek black SUV, someone else was watching. Hands gripping the steering wheel. Eyes locked on the scene unfolding inside the garage. She didn't get out, but she didn't drive away either. The rain hadn't let up. It tapped steadily against the windshield of the sleek black SUV parked across the street. Inside, Claire sat motionless. Her hands were still on the wheel, her knuckles pale from how tightly she gripped it. The engine was off. No music, no phone call. Just silence. And her daughter, Maya, inside that dimly lit garage, alone with a stranger. Claire had followed her. Again, she told herself it wasn't spying. Not really. She had only wanted to make sure Maya was safe. This grease-covered, quiet man wasn't dangerous. That's all it was. But now she'd been sitting there for almost half an hour, watching, waiting Dot inside. Maya sat on an overturned crate, legs swinging, her oversized hoodie damp and clinging to her. Elias was crouched beside her, showing her something about the bike, some small parts she couldn't quite make out. She saw his hands move slowly, showing her how to adjust something on the wheel. Maya listened closely, her face focused, serious, and then she smiled. Dot, it wasn't a small smile either. It was real, bright, the kind Claire hadn't seen in months. Not since before the move. Not since. She felt a sting behind her eyes and blinked it away quickly. No, not now. Elias said something else. Maya leaned forward, repeating the motion. He'd just shown her. She was learning, fixing something. And not just the bike. Claire didn't know this man. But she was watching her daughter become more herself than she'd been in a long time. That meant something, didn't it? Still, she couldn't bring herself to step out of the car. She didn't want to shatter whatever fragile moment was happening. And truthfully, she wasn't ready not to meet him. Not to admit what she'd done. So she stayed parked, hidden, watching from behind tinted glass like a ghost haunting her own child's life. Across the street, Elias dusted his hands on an old rag and stood up. His knees popped as he did, and he muttered something under his breath. Maya really laughed, and it echoed slightly in the garage. He turned to clean up, and Maya wandered to a corner near his workbench. She looked at the walls lined with tools, old posters, even a photo or two, but one thing caught her eye. A drawer, slightly open. Before she could reach for it, Elias was there. Not angry, just quiet. Not much in there, he said gently. But later that night, when Maya had gone promising she'd come back tomorrow for the bike, Elias did open that drawer. Not for her. For himself. The workshop was quiet again. Only the soft hum of the rain and the distant sound of tires on wet pavement filled the air. He knelt slowly, opened the bottom drawer all the way, and pulled out a small wrapped package. Tissue paper. Lavender-colored. Faded. He sat on the floor and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a child's backpack. New, small. The kind meant for someone in first or second grade. Bright purple with stars on the front. Still smelled faintly of store. Shelves and hoped it had been meant for a daughter. He ran his thumb along the edge of the zipper. The ache that lived in his chest most days grew sharper. This was hers, the one who never got the chance to be born. The one he and his wife had already named. He kept it all this time, buried under bolts and forgotten wrenches. For what? He didn't know, but tonight it didn't feel like a memory anymore. It felt like something waiting. Slowly, carefully, he began to fill it. a mini tire pump, a flashlight shaped like a turtle, a small set of Allen keys, a granola bar dot, and then he reached for a notepad and tore a sheet free. Wrote in large, blocky letters, his handwriting firm, though slightly uneven. Things break. People fall. The trick isn't to avoid it. It's to learn how to get back up. You're stronger than you think. He folded the note in half, tucked it inside the bag, and gently hooked the straps over the bike's handlebars. Then he turned off the light and left the garage. Across the street, the SUV was gone, but Clara had seen it. She'd waited until Maya walked home, and only then had she driven off. Her fingers trembled on the steering wheel as she played the scene over in her mind. The man, the quiet way he taught her daughter, the way he protected her near the truck. He didn't smile much, but he wasn't cold either. He was just carrying something. She understood that look, that silence. That wait dot 3 years ago, Clara had been a different woman. Sharp, unshakable. She ran meetings with confidence, handled clients like puzzles to solve. She made things happen, and then her husband died. A sudden stroke. No warning, no goodbye. Just a phone call, a hospital hallway, and then silence dots. Since then, she'd built walls. Around her work, around herself. Around Maya dot, and now here was this man who also knew loss, handing her daughter tools to rebuild something. Not just a bike, but confidence, trust, maybe even pieces of herself. That scared Claire more than anything because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure what to do next. But tomorrow, when Maya returned for her bike, Claire knew one thing. She'd be parked across the street again, not to spy, just to see it. The next morning came quietly. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, holding onto the storm like a memory. Elias stood at the edge of his garage, coffee in hand, watching the street as if expecting it to speak. He didn't have to wait long. Maya came walking up the sidewalk, her hoodie pulled up, shoes squeaking slightly with each step. She was alone. Again, Elias frowned at that, but didn't ask. She gave him a little wave. Her eyes landed immediately on the purple backpack hanging from the bike's handlebars. She froze. She stepped toward it slowly, like it might disappear if she moved too. Fast. Her fingers brushed the fabric like it was made of glass. Carefully, she unzipped it. One by one, she pulled the items out, the tools, the flashlight, the granola bar. Then the note. Her lips moved silently as she read it. When she looked up at him, her eyes were glassy. But she was smiling. Was this for me? Elias scratched the back of his neck, suddenly uncomfortable. Seemed like you could use it. Maya nodded slowly, clutching the note to her chest. It makes me feel brave, she whispered. And just like that, a pattern began. She came back the next Saturday. And the Saturday after that, and the one after that too. It wasn't always bikes. Sometimes she brought a rusty old scooter she'd found near the park. Sometimes they just organized tools or swept the floor or sat in comfortable silence, listening to the radio. Elias started leaving the garage door half open when he heard her coming. He told himself it was just for airflow. But the truth was, he liked having her there. He found himself setting aside small tasks for her, tiny jobs that didn't matter much but made her feel important. Replacing a worn-out handle grip, matching stray screws into jars, checking tire pressure, and she was curious. Always asking questions. Always watching. She started keeping a little notepad in her backpack, writing down everything she learned. One afternoon, they were working on an old bike frame. It was stubborn and rusted, but they were making progress. Maya leaned over it, brow furrowed. This one keeps clicking when I turn the pedals, she said. Elias handed her a wrench. What do you think it is? She paused. Maybe. The bottom bracket? He raised an eyebrow. Bottom bracket, huh? Someone's been studying. She grinned. You told me last time. Right. He nodded. And what do I always say? Machines aren't magic, she repeated, mimicking his voice. They're honest. He gave a rare smile. Exactly. She tilted her head, thoughtful. Are people like that too? Elias blinked. Like what? Like machines. If you... Listen, do they tell the truth? He leaned back on his stool, arms crossed. Sometimes, other times, top people rattle. She looked up. Like when I say I'm okay, but I'm really sad? Yeah, Elias said softly. Exactly like that. She looked down at the bike again, quiet for a while. From across the street, Claire sat in her car, watching. She watched Maya smile. Watched Elias gently guide her hands. Watched the girl she'd been so afraid of losing slowly come back to life in a place filled with dust. Oil and quiet patience. It tore her in two. Part of her wanted to march in there, take Maya's hand, and bring her home. The other part, the quieter one, knew that would only build another wall. So for now, she watched. Still unsure if she belonged in that space. Still afraid of what stepping inside might mean. Until one day, she did. The decision wasn't planned. It wasn't even dramatic. She had parked like always, coffee in hand, phone untouched beside her. She watched Maya working on a chain while Elias knelt beside her, nodding at her progress. Then Maya looked up, laughing at something he said. Claire's hand moved to the door handle without thinking, and then she was crossing the street. The garage door was half open, the little bell above it ringing softly as she stepped inside. The air was warm, filled with the scent of rubber and motor oil and something that smelled like old memories. Elias looked up. You're Maya's mom, he said flatly. Not unkind, just stating fact. She nodded. Claire. Her blazer was sharp. Her heels clicked on the concrete. Her presence felt out of place. Like a business meeting had wandered into a backyard. I've been watching you. The words came out harsher than she meant. Elias wiped his hands on a rag, calm. The black SUV, he said. I figured. She straightened, trying to explain. I needed to know who my daughter was spending her time with. I needed to know if you were safe. He didn't answer right away. Just turned and looked at the wall behind him. Claire followed his eyes. A faded photo. A younger Elias smiling beside a woman with a round belly. Her hand resting protectively on it. Underneath, a small wooden plaque, hand-carved, Emma's Light. Claire took a slow breath. Her voice softened. Your wife? Elias's voice was a low rasp. We lost her, and our little girl, 5 years ago. Car accident. Claire didn't speak. She didn't need to. She knew that kind of grief. Knew how it built walls. How it whispered lies. At night, I'm sorry, she finally said. He looked at her then. Really looked. And for the first time, she saw something familiar in his eyes. Not hardness, but heaviness. Like someone carrying something they never put down. I don't know why your daughter keeps coming back here, he admitted. But she does. And when she's here, I don't feel like I lost everything. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. Outside. The sun dipped behind a row of rooftops, casting long golden shadows into the garage. Claire turned to leave, but before she did, she looked back at the girl with grease on her hands and hope in her eyes. I don't think I need to worry anymore, she said softly, but neither of them knew what was coming, because across the neighborhood, someone else had been watching too. And the world wasn't nearly as kind. It started the way trouble often does, not with something big, but with something small. A glance, a whisper, a bit of envy left to grow in the shadows. The neighborhood kids had started noticing the girl in the hoodie. The one who didn't play games or chase dogs or ride bikes like the rest of them. She was always in that garage. Every Saturday. Sometimes after school too, and not just hanging around learning. They saw her gripping real tools, not plastic ones. Fixing chains, tightening bolts, laughing with the mechanic everyone else thought was weird and too quiet. She had grease on her hands and pride on her face, and that made some of them feel left out, especially Leo. Leo was 10, bold loud. always the first to jump off the swing set or race down the steepest hill. But lately, his stories weren't getting as many laughs. People were paying more attention to Maya. She wasn't loud, but she had something else now, confidence. She thinks she's better than us. One of the boys muttered one afternoon, "She's just fixing bikes," Leo said, but even as he said it, something twisted in his chest. He wanted in dots, so they came up with a plan. They dragged an old, rusty bike from behind someone's shed. The kind with a dented frame and a wobbly front wheel, a bike nobody cared about. A project. They wheeled it to the empty lot beside Elias's garage and set up shop. They didn't ask Elias, didn't tell him. Just started copying what they thought they'd seen. Leo crouched low like Maya did. He tugged on the brake cable like Elias had shown her once. He twisted a bolt too far and then tightened another without checking where it led. He didn't know it, but he had just disconnected the front brake entirely. "Let's test it," he grinned. "No helmet?" one kid asked. Leo shrugged. "It's just a lot. Come on." He jumped on, feet pushing hard against the pedals. The bike wobbled, but then straightened. Confidence soared in his chest. For a moment, he felt unstoppable. Then the tire hit the edge of a deep pothole near the fence. There was no brake to help him recover. The front wheel twisted sideways. Leo flew. The sound of his landing was sickening. A sharp crack, followed by a scream that stopped every bird in the trees. Elias heard it from inside the garage. He dropped the wrench in his hand and ran. Leo was on the ground, arm bent at a horrible angle, his face pale and contorted in pain. The boys were standing in stunned silence. Elias dropped to his knees beside him. "Don't move," he said calmly, already pulling off his jacket to support the boy's arm. One of the kids ran to get a parent. The ambulance arrived in minutes. But the damage had already been done. Not just to Leo's arm, but to Elias's life. The next day, the garage looked different. Bright red spray paint across the front door. Big letters, shaky and angry. "Reckless. Danger." The old wooden sign that had hung above the garage for over 20 years was broken, hanging by a single screw. Elias stood and stared at it, arms limp at his sides. He had known this was coming. The second he saw Leo fall, the second he heard the scream, he felt it in his bones. Maya didn't show up that morning. Across the neighborhood, phones buzzed. Screens lit up with the headline, "Unlicensed mechanic encourages children in dangerous garage. One boy hospitalized." It didn't matter that Elias hadn't been working with Leo. Didn't matter that he told the boys not to play there. The story had already grown teeth, and it was biting. Inside her home, Claire stood in the doorway of Maya's room. "You can't go back there," she said gently. Maya spun around, her voice cracking. "Why not?" "Because it's not safe. People are angry, sweetheart. They think Elias. He didn't do anything wrong," Maya shouted. "He told them not to go over there. He helped them. He helps everyone. Why can't they see that?" Claire took a step closer. "I know it's not fair, but people are scared. They're not thinking clearly right now." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "He listens to me, Mom. He never treats me like I'm too small or too dumb. He makes me feel strong." Claire didn't have a reply for that. The silence between them swelled until Maya turned away, slamming her door behind her. Elias sat alone in the dark that day, tools untouched, the radio silent. He hadn't cried since Emma died. But now, sitting on his old stool in the middle of his wrecked sanctuary, he lowered his head into his hands. He remembered her voice, soft, teasing from an old cassette tape that played sometimes when he couldn't sleep. "You're going to make her a little grease monkey just like her dad." But there was no daughter, no Emma, no laughter. Just the echo of everything he had lost. And now? He had lost more. He thought he had finally done something good. Let someone in. Reached out again after years of silence, and it had all fallen apart. He hadn't just failed to protect Leo, he had let Maya down. Claire himself, he stayed there. still as the sun moved across the sky, his mind drifting between what was and what would never be, and outside, the whole world kept turning. Unaware that a man who had once carried hope in his calloused hands now sat quietly inside a storm of shame. But not everyone had walked away. Not yet. That night, the wind picked up. Not the kind that made leaves dance or chimes ring. This wind felt heavier. Like something was shifting quietly, but permanently. Claire sat at her dining table, untouched tea growing cold beside her. Her phone screen lit up every few seconds. Emails, news alerts, social media notifications. All of them said the same thing. Unlicensed garage puts boy in hospital. Mechanic under fire after child's crash. Where were the parents? But it was the comments that broke her. He should be arrested. Teaching kids? What kind of man thinks that's okay? If that was my child, she scrolled until her eyes blurred, until her chest felt like it couldn't hold air, until the guilt spilled into her lap. She had waited too long to speak, to step in, to say something. She had watched from her car, her window, her position as a mother and CEO, but she hadn't acted, and now the world had made its judgment. Across the hallway, Maya's door was closed. The light under it stayed on late. Claire could hear her crying, though the girl tried to hide it. She reached for her phone. Call Martin, she said aloud. Her head of security answered on the third ring. Claire, I want every frame of footage from the street cams near the garage, she said, her voice tight. The last 6 weeks. There was a pause. All of them? Yes. I don't care how long it takes. I want the truth. And I want it now. Elias didn't open the garage for 3 days. He came in early, locked the door from the inside, and just sat there. He didn't touch the tools. Didn't clean. He couldn't bring himself to do anything except exist. But on the 4th night, just after midnight, he left. No one saw him. He walked, hands buried in his jacket pockets, across quiet blocks and sleeping homes. The wind bit at his face, but he didn't flinch. He carried only a small paper bag, folded carefully. At the hospital, he moved through the fluorescent halls like a shadow. Nurses nodded politely, mistaking him for a family member too tired to speak. No one stopped him. He found Leo's room easily. The boy was asleep, one arm elevated in a white cast, his cheeks pale against the pillow. Elias stood at the doorway for a long time, not moving, just breathing. Then he stepped forward and set the paper bag on the nightstand. Inside was a sleek black helmet. New, safe, strong. Beside it, a note. Falling is part of learning. Getting back up is part of life. You're not broken. You're just getting started. He didn't say anything, didn't wait to be seen. He just left. But someone did see. Leo's mother had just come back with a cup of hospital coffee when she stopped in the hallway. Catching sight of the mechanic everyone said was dangerous, the man who never said a word in his defense, leaving, a gift beside her sleeping son. She picked up the note. Read the words. Then looked at the helmet. Something inside her shifted. 10 hours later, Claire was still in her home office, eyes red but focused. Her desk was covered in sticky notes and screenshots. Security footage played on a loop on her laptop. There Elias gently guiding Maya's hand over a bike frame. There him handing a curious Leo a granola bar, then motioning him away from a wrench. There Elias rushing forward, catching a boy before he tripped into the garage lift. And finally 3 weeks ago, Leo stumbling over a loose cable. Elias moving like lightning to stop his fall. I got you, kid, he had said. Not on my watch. This wasn't carelessness. This was caution, patience, protection, and no one had seen it, because no one had looked. Claire pushed back from her desk and stood. Her hands were trembling not from fear, but from purpose. She called her assistant and said 7. Words she hadn't said in years. I need to speak to the press. The next morning, City Hall was packed. Cameras, reporters, microphones held out like weapons. Claire stepped to the podium wearing no makeup, no designer suit, just jeans, a soft sweater, and eyes full of fire. "I'm here today," she began, "because a good man has been judged unfairly by a story told without all the facts." The crowd quieted. She looked up, not at the lights, not at the reporters, but straight into the lens of the main camera. "Like many of you, I judged him too. I let fear speak louder than truth. And I was wrong." She reached into a folder and held up still images screen grabs from the security footage. Elias helping Maya fix a tire. Stopping Leo from stepping on a sharp nail. Refusing tools to unsupervised kids. For weeks, Elias has been quietly teaching children how to be strong, how to be patient, how to learn from mistakes. My daughter, who lost her father 3 years ago, has smiled more in the last month than she has in a year, because this man gave her something no one else could. She paused. Hope. She held up the footage. This shows Elias preventing more injuries than anyone will ever know. It shows him caring when no one asked him to. And when he was accused, he stayed silent not because he was guilty, but because he didn't want to hurt anyone else. That is who he is. The room was silent. That's why today I'm proud to announce the launch of a new nonprofit, the Hands-On Center. A murmur ran through the crowd. It will be a place where kids can learn, build, make mistakes, and grow stronger. It will be backed by my company's foundation and led by its first and only instructor, Elias. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. Claire stepped down. She had said everything that mattered. That afternoon in a quiet hospital room, Leah's mother showed her son the news clip. Leo stared at the screen. "That's him?" "Yes," she whispered. "The man who brought you the helmet." Leo looked over at the helmet, sitting proudly beside his bed. "He's a good man, isn't he?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, baby, he is." Then she picked up her phone and dialed Claire's number. "I was wrong," she said. Her voice shook. "Completely wrong. How can we help?" The loudest voice of blame had just become Elias's fiercest ally Dot and across the city for the first time. In weeks, the tide began to turn, not because of a headline, but because of truth. Because someone finally listened Dot and someone finally spoke. The garage looked different now, not because the tools had moved or the walls had changed. The oil stains were still there. The lights still flickered. And the same squeaky stool sat under the same cracked window, but the silence was gone. Dot in its place with something better: laughter, footsteps, the hum of conversation, and the steady rhythm of hammers, wrenches, and voices asking, "Can I try?" It started slowly. Dot. The Hands-On Center didn't launch with fanfare or a ribbon cutting. There was no parade of cameras or press. Just a single Monday morning when the doors opened and kids started showing up. Some came shyly, holding broken skateboards or bikes with missing pedals. Others came curious, brought by parents who had once been afraid but were now willing to see for themselves. They were met by the same man oil-stained shirt, calloused hands, quiet eyes. Elias didn't give speeches. He gave them space. And slowly, these kids who'd grown up in a world that often moved too fast, too loud, too full of rules and screens, found something in that little garage that made sense. A stripped screw. A stripped-down truth. Here, mistakes weren't punished. They were expected. Here, things didn't have to be perfect. They just had to be honest. Maya was there every Saturday, of course. But now she came with purpose. Her hands moved with confidence. Her voice firmer. She greeted the new kids, helped them unpack their tools, showed them how to hold a wrench without pinching their fingers. She'd become someone others looked to. One afternoon, she crouched beside a little boy struggling with a loose brake. "You're not doing it wrong," she said gently. "You're just doing it for the first time," Elias overheard. He turned away before she saw the smile on his face. She had listened. She'd become the kind of person he wished he'd had growing up. Claire was there, too, almost every day now. Gone were the tailored suits and clicking heels. These days, she wore jeans and soft sweatshirts. Her sleeves often rolled up to organize supplies or help scrub down workbenches. She still worked at the company, but her phone stayed mostly in her bag while she was here. She'd never been good at small talk or arts and crafts, but she could build a spreadsheet like no one else. And somehow that became useful. She handled orders, safety forms, donations, and emails. And every time someone stopped by with doubt in their eyes, she told them the truth, not the one from the headlines, the real one, the one she saw unfold from the window of her SUV, the one about a man who taught her daughter how to be brave again, not with big words, but with small, steady kindness. Elias and Claire never spoke directly about what was growing between them, but it was their Dot in the way she handed him coffee without asking how he liked it because she already knew, in the way he moved aside so she could reach. The top shelf, no words, just trust. In the soft glances across a crowded room, and the shared silence that no longer felt empty. There was no need to name it Dot, it was building itself like everything else here. One small, honest step at a time. Year past Dot's seasons turned. The center grew, they added a corner for painting. A shelf with donated books. A bin filled with spare helmets, all labeled with names and colorful marker. The community changed, too. Parents who once crossed the street to avoid the garage now brought cookies, paper towels, and their kids. Local businesses donated wood and rubber. A retired bike shop owner offered to volunteer. Even the mayor stopped by once, awkward in his photo op smile, but genuinely impressed. But for Elias, the biggest change came one chilly December afternoon. The annual holiday party. The garage was decked out in lights strung unevenly but shining bright. A pine-scented candle burned near the entrance, and someone had brought cinnamon cookies that made the whole place smell like home. Kids buzzed around, showing off bikes they'd fixed, parts they'd painted, tools they'd learned to name. Maya was helping a smaller girl patch a tire when she suddenly gasped, "My helmet!" She spun, eyes scanning the room. She ran toward the back of the garage where she'd left it. Claire called after her, but Maya didn't answer. She had found Elias standing near the workbench, wiping his hands. "Dad," she called out. "I forgot. My helmet." The word hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Clear. Loud. Certain. Elias froze. She'd said it before once, in a whisper weeks ago. He had heard it, but wasn't sure if it had been on purpose. He didn't bring it up, but now she had said it in front of everyone. Proudly. Fully. He turned. Slowly, her small arms wrapped around his waist before he could speak. He dropped the rag and knelt, arms wrapping around her in return, holding her like something he'd been waiting to carry forever. His eyes stung. His throat tightened. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Claire stood nearby, watching. Her hand found his shoulder. When he looked up, she was smiling at him in that quiet way she did when she wasn't hiding anymore. Together they stood. Elias grabbing the helmet off the hook. "Don't want to lose this again, do we?" he said, his voice rough but steady. Maya beamed. "Not a chance." They walked back into the party dash together, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder. No labels. No need for them. Just three people who had been broken in different ways. Now a hole in the same place. On the main wall of the garage, just above the shelf of tools, was a new mural, painted by the kids, designed by Maya, and approved by everyone. It showed bikes and scooters and rollerblades and wagons, all in bright, playful colors. There were kids in hoodies and sneakers and some with mismatched socks. There was a giant wrench shaped like a tree, growing parts instead of leaves. But in the middle, just above it all, was a simple phrase, written in elegant script. "Family is not always blood. It's who shows up when you need them most." Elias stood and looked at those words long after the party ended. The room had emptied. Lights were off, but the mural glowed softly in the light from the street. He thought about the girl who had once stood soaked in the rain, clutching a broken bike. The mother who sat alone in a car, torn between fear and faith. The man who thought his best days were behind him. Now, They had something better than repair. They had each other. They had home dot, and in the small, warm, wonderfully noisy sanctuary of second chances, that was more than enough.